Mario's information. As the last time he had seen Mario, he had watched him leave the police station. Chester assumed that his friend must be free, so he tried his house. The previous year, he had organized a party for his son and invited all his work colleagues. Chester had gone alone, because Diana did not wish to mix with plebeians, as she so nicely put it, claiming that the manager's daughter should not get too friendly with his employees. He remembered the place well, not least because it was close to the riding club where Diana kept her racehorses. Although it was a sunny day, he found all windows and doors in Mario's house closed. At a glance, the house looked abandoned. Perhaps Mario had moved in a hurry, in an attempt to protect his family from prying journalists and nosy neighbors. The mailbox was full to the brim with post, obviously unchecked for days. He thought twice about ringing the doorbell, certain that the house was empty, but he decided to try it. "Wait. I'll come down." Someone was in and had been observing him from behind one of the shutters. He had been introduced by the thundering sound of the motorbike, allowing that person plenty of time to assess who the visitor was. The front door opened by a few inches, then the head of his colleague popped outside and, after confirming that he was alone, he opened the gate, suspiciously looking up and down the lane. As Chester approached the door, he was grabbed violently and shoved inside. It was very dark, but for the dim light of a few rays of sunshine that entered through the gaps in the windows. Mario was alone and evidently drunk. He stank of alcohol and was very frightened. On the table, several wine and whiskey bottles were half empty. Pacing back and forth with a bottle in one hand, he raved about apocalyptic wars, the end of the world, and he said that not a soul was safe from the prophecies coming true. Chester sat down, to show him he was calm and relaxed, poured himself a drink, in sign of friendship and that he was on his side, and asked, "Tell me, my friend, what do you mean? What prophecies? What war? What about the end of the world?" Mario was very nervous. His hands shook visibly and answered, "You know very well what I'm talking about. They came to you too. Don't patronize me. I know you have the wristband too." "Cool as before," Chester answered. "Come on, have a seat, tell me what you know. We are friends, so let us help one another." Mario sat down, shaking like a leaf, his arms and legs twitching as if he had been bitten by a tarantula. Stuttering, he mumbled that he had been given a wristband too, but that as soon as he was outside the police station, some men in masks had grabbed him, forced him into a car with tinted windows, and there, a man whose bodyguards referred to as Professor invited him to join his space mission. But he refused. He wanted no more to do with that mess, so they removed the cuff from his wrist, aided by the heat of a powerful blowtorch, which they used to heat and expand the metal, so that his hand could slide out of it. After that, they threw him out of the car and abandoned him in a dark alley. Mario lifted a shirt sleeve, and Chester was shocked to see that he was burnt all the way from his hand to his elbow. That explained the reason behind all the alcoholic drinks on the table. He was not trying to get drunk, but rather he was trying to anesthetize the pain. Chester asked him why he had not sought medical assistance at a hospital, but Mario said that he was afraid to show his face around town, terrified to meet those men again, but most importantly, he had to rush home and remove his wife and kids from there, send them somewhere safe. They were innocent and needed to stay out of all that was going on. As Mario stammered away a confusion of thoughts and words, Chester took some electronic keys he saw on the table. "The yellow one," Mario shouted, so Chester dropped the rest back onto the table. "I managed to copy the codes the soldier asked me for in that one. You deal with it. I'm not leaving this place. An alien attack is coming. We're all going to die." Chester understood that he could do no more for his friend. He had lost his mind. So he put the key in his pocket and moved to leave, when suddenly Mario grabbed one of his arms and told him, "Think of my children. I entrust them to you. My accounts and passwords are also in that key. Take care of them. Build a refuge and be safe. My days are numbered now. The professor will ask me to share information on our boss with him, but I will refuse him again. You know, my friend, before you came to the office, I saw. Mario stopped and dropped his head in shame. Perhaps he hoped someone would do away with him. He wanted to pay for something he had done in the past, when instead of rebelling, he had followed evil and cruel orders. Chester left as he thought over those words and sighed, once more on the back of his stallion. Things were turning sour, and perhaps the best thing he could do by his friend would be to take him to Argo. But just as he considered going back inside, he heard 2 gunshots, then a third, then a fourth. When the gate opened to let him out, someone had quickly sneaked into the house, shot Mario, and was now dragging him across the floor by his arms, belly up, careless that Chester was no more than 20 meters away from the scene. It was too late to help. There was nothing more that he could do, and if he did not hurry, perhaps he would end up in the same way. So he sped off, headed for Ariel's home. Perhaps she was also in danger. Along the way, road work slowed him down and was stopped by a worker with a red bat, but out of his orange coat, the worker pulled out a gun and pointed it at Chester's face. Obviously, his reaction was to raise his arm to protect himself from the bullet, although they would pierce through his hand anyway. But the ring began to glow, and in a flash it released a blinding ray of energy, which literally pulverized the killer. Astonished and happy of that achievement, he set off at full speed, never slowing down all the way to Ariel's apartment. He arrived still in shock at having killed a man, and he stopped for a moment to think. After all, if he had not thought of pulverizing that man, he would have been dead, and his hour had not yet come. The door was fixed, so he rang the bell, and Emma opened the door, with a child in her arms. "Cart!" Chester exclaimed. "How do you know? You cannot touch him until you are clean." "You stink like a wet dog," Emma responded, as she walked into the lounge, surprised that he had known the child's name, which she had chosen for him. But the boy, in his auntie's arms, turned to look at that funny man, curious. He liked his funny, spiky hair, although he reeked of sweat. He looked crazy, because he had stopped in the doorway, with a strange grin in his face, but he seemed nice. "Come on, doggy. Come inside and close the door," said Emma, laughing. Chester stepped inside slowly. They were eating dinner, so he quietly moved a chair and sat down. Ariel did not speak, but a happy smile spread across her face said everything. She was happy to see her family reunited. Emma, on the other hand, glanced from child to Chester several times, then burst out laughing till her sides split. "My poor boy, could you not have looked like Mummy or me?" she said. The little boy smiled, but did not understand. Chester did. He understood Emma's poisonous face very well, and, with a serious and offended look on his face, grabbed a fork and started to dig into the spaghetti Ariel had promptly placed in front of him. It looked like a typical family dinner, with silent mouthfuls and the television as background noise. That wonderful peace was only broken, from time to time, by Emma's sporadic remarks. "Did you at least wash those filthy hands?" Chester ignored her and focused all his attentions on that splendid little creature. He stared at him with love in his eyes. He looked so much like him that it was almost like looking into a mirror. But at the same time, Ariel's loving eyes were on Chester. After she washed the dishes, Ariel took some clothes from a bag. She had gone shopping for him that afternoon, sure as ever that he would have come back to her. She gave them to him together with a clean towel. "There, good little skunk. Go have a wash. And don't you dare get the floor wet." Emma's words did not come across as ironic at all. He did need a shower, badly. The water was so hot that the bathroom filled with steam. That warmth washed away both the dirt and his tiredness and stress, which had wound up inside him over the past few days. The sole thought in his mind was that beautiful little face, that sweet child, who he still struggled to call his son. He had to adjust to the thought of having become a father, that a part of him had been born and was growing, occupying a place in the world. He stood in the shower, slightly bent forward, with his hands on the wall and water running through his hair, for half an hour or more. That relaxing time of meditation was only interrupted by a shrill voice behind the door. "Hot water doesn't come cheap, you know. You'll sprout gills if you stay in there any longer. Emma burst in, without knocking, wading through the cloud of steam which had filled the room. Shocked, Chester lowered the pressure of the water jet, enjoying the last few hot drops that fell straight down the back of his head. He opened the sliding doors, and only then did he realize he had created a sauna. A hand appeared through the mist, holding a towel for him. Odd. Being kind to me now? Have you taken a shine to me, or did you slip and bump your head? He asked, surprised, but an unexpected voice and tone answered, Yes, I have taken a shine to you. I might even fancy you. And through the cloud of steam Ariel appeared. She had seen him naked many times in the past, but suddenly seeing him like that after years made her blush. She turned her face away, but still admired him with a sideway gaze. He too was embarrassed, but for another reason. His nether regions were totally shaven. It was a condition imposed by Diana, who otherwise insisted that he sleep on the sofa. Chester had not only found his son, he had found the mother, the love of his life. The purpose of his life became clear, and he kissed her. Ariel had waited for that kiss for so long, the way a little girl awaits her daddy outside school, and, in that moment, they both realized that things could go back the way they used to be, that the wedding had not been cancelled, but merely postponed. Suddenly, the door burst open, making them jump. "Have you pigs finished in here? Cart needs to brush his teeth." Ariel rushed out of the bathroom, laughing, and Chester followed her, with the towel around his waist, then entered the bedroom and closed the door behind them. Needless to say, a terrifying scream came from the bathroom. "What's all this water on the floor? Who's supposed to mop it up?" Emma adored looking after her little nephew, which was a blessing for Chester, who at least for that night could enjoy the peace of Ariel's bed. She sat on that bed, undressing for the night, apparently unfazed that a man sat behind her, trying not to look at her directly, as not to be rude, but granting her privacy. He watched her reflection in the mirror. Of course she knew he was watching her. She had expected it to happen. She wanted him to. She behaved as if no interruption had occurred between past and present, although of course she had not forgotten the day of that broken wedding day. In her mind, this was the natural continuation of their relationship, the first night as husband and wife. Her burning desire to live by his side as husband and wife was finally materializing, as if the years they had spent apart had been necessary, but he had then come home to his family. She was happy and comfortable in the intimacy of that room. Every night leading to that one, she would daydream about a completed ceremony, with a positive, "I now declare you husband and wife." Chester smiled at the sight of her beautiful, inviting curves, unchanged by time. He lay back, relaxing onto the soft mattress, breathing in the sweet smell of clean sheets. He blushed, suddenly aware of his body, as thoughts of her and her body had awoken in him primal instincts, which time with Diana's cold refusals had laid to rest. Ariel laughed, also aware of his erection, as he tried his best to hide it under the sheets. Dressed in nothing but a light night dress, she leant towards him, one foot on the bed, her thigh stroking his hip. Chester tried not to move, reluctant to come across as the unchanged, sex-crazed man he once was. He tried to stifle his desires, swallowing dry and trying his best to think of other matters. "We're off to bed," came Emma's voice, and she kicked the door. Chester became serious at one and said, "I want to see him and wish him a good night," and he slipped on the pajamas which had been placed under his pillow. He left the room, wishing he had time to play with his little boy, to get to know him, and most of all, to tell him who he was. But it was the boy's bedtime, and Emma was there, glaring at him ferociously, as assurance that she had no intention to allow that the child stay up beyond his bedtime, otherwise he would have been awake all night, only falling asleep at the first light of morning, after having watched lots of cartoons. It had happened many times since his birth, and it had driven both her and the boy's mother crazy. No chance. Chester had to remain outside his room, which he did, obediently, if only out of fear of getting bitten by that woman. He rested his head on the side of the door, in silence, watching his little boy toss and turn in his little blue bed, while his auntie lovingly sang him a lullaby. In her sweetness, however, Emma found time to raise a fist and poke the air with her middle finger up. Chester got the message and, with one last loving glance at his boy, returned to his own room. He found Ariel awaiting him with a smile, sat on the bed with a hairdryer in a hand. Chester touched his head, and his hair was still wet. He had not realized. He sat next to that beautiful woman who, with love and tenderness, proceeded to dry it, running her fingers through his thick mane of hair. The warm air and that massage of the head relaxed him so much that he closed his eyes. So many years had passed since he had relaxed around a woman. Diana had never dried his hair, let alone massaged his head. "I was forced not to marry you. They kidnapped me and threatened to hurt you and your family." He blurted it all out as soon as Ariel turned off the hairdryer. After a few eternal seconds, she answered, "I know, Argo told me. I don't blame you, believe me," and with that, she put her arms around him from behind. Chester breathed a sigh of relief, deep enough to vacate his lungs. He felt as if suddenly free of a heavy weight. He did not have to explain any more and risk her not believing him. Fortunately, Argo had spoken on his behalf. "I'll go check on Cart. I'll be back in a minute." Ariel left the room quickly, barefoot, as not to make any noise. Chester suddenly remembered the codes and he who would turn up to collect them. In the morning he would go back to the alley where he had first met him, which perhaps might be the place he would reappear. But a thought was growing in his mind. He was putting everyone in danger by being there. Perhaps someone would turn up that very night to take possession of those forsaken codes and, almost certainly, with cruel intentions. Ariel returned with a brighter smile than when she had left. "He sleeps." She closed the door and locked it. She then approached the bedside table, took a lighter from the drawer, which made Chester presume that she might light a cigarette, but no, romantic as ever, she took some candles too, which she lit quickly, before turning off the light. She replaced the lighter and took her man by the shoulders, pushing him onto the mattress, straddled him, as she slipped off her nightdress and, placing her hands between the chest and neck of her prey, she said in a sultry voice, "Now you are mine." Chester opened his eyes slowly, awoken by noises in the distance. Something was making a noise similar to an object falling and rolling away. His immediate assumption was that perhaps a water pump had broken, something which had often happened in his own house, so he did not think to give it another thought. The candles had been consumed and outside was still dark. Dawn had not yet broken. He could not see much around the room, but he could hear. He could hear and feel Ariel sleeping deeply and blissfully, wrapped around him like a koala upon a tree. He felt her warmth, that human warmth which he had missed for so long, which made him feel alive, safe, loved, and wanted. The only touch extended by Diana, in the night, was a slap in the face when she turned around in her sleep. Slowly and gently, he wriggled out of her embrace, trying not to wake her, then tried to get to the door, feeling his way around, relying upon the little light from the full moon, which penetrated through the window shutters. "There," he whispered. The light in the corridor had been left on by Ariel, in case Cart woke up in the night. He went into the living room, with the intention to get dressed and go directly up to the alleyway where he imagined somebody would take advantage of the darkness to meet him. He heard a noise and stopped immediately. He was frightened, but he was the only man there, and it was his duty to go and check that everything was all right. He stepped quietly towards the kitchen. The light was on and the sounds got louder. But it was not the sound of someone rummaging, more that of a huge rat gnawing away at something. He was petrified of what he might find behind that door, but he took a deep breath and opened it. "What do you want?" Emma screamed, her mouth full of carrots, annoyed at being caught during her midnight snack. Chester breathed a sigh of relief and went in saying, "Blimey, are you always eating? Aren't you on a diet or something?" Bitter and annoyed at his remarks, she told him to mind his own business. "What now? Are you running off and leaving her again?" "Sure. You've done your business, so now you can bugger off. Did you just pop round to provide Cart with a sister?" "You swine." Chester did not answer, quietly grabbed a large celery from the table, and then, "Stick that in your mouth too, and shut up." He quietly tried to recover from that fright, angry at his own stupidity, to have gone in to face potential danger with bare hands, without a weapon, not even a broomstick. He could have easily run into a killer. He took a glass, throwing a dirty look on the devourer of raw vegetables, and filled it with water up to the brim, then drunk it all in one go. Then, before heading back into the living room, "To get dressed," he said. "Hey, tell Ariel I'll be back tonight." Emma raised a leg in an attempt to kick him in the arse, but he was out like a shot, stifling his laughter with a hand on his mouth, to avoid waking the others. On the sofa, he found some neatly folded clothes, but also his old and first motorcycle jacket, made of black leather. In a flashback, he pictured himself younger, without a care in the world, happy, and he stroked that leather, still intact after so many years. He smiled at the thought that it had cost him a month's wage, which he handed to the happy shopkeeper, who had thrown in a blue handkerchief, for him to wear around his neck, as extra protection from the cool air. He wore the jacket with satisfaction, zipped it up, glad not to have increased in weight since the old days. It still fitted him perfectly, and, in one of the pockets, he found the blue bandana, which he promptly wrapped around his neck. Now he felt just like a centaur. On the landing, he found something unexpected. Traces of blood ran down the steps, perhaps connected to the sounds that had woken him up, and no water pump had broken. There must have been a struggle and someone was hurt. But who? Perhaps a killer had come to get him, but who had stopped him? The only person on his side who looked like a fighter was Argo, unless he had sent one of his men. He followed the traces out of the building, on the footpath, close to his motorbike, but not a soul. There was no one, not even any cars parked nearby. He mounted his new, faithful friend. The thunderous engine echoed in the empty street, the sound booming in between buildings. He concluded that it was better to leave immediately, rather than to let it warm up first, otherwise it would have woken up the entire neighborhood. He inserted first gear with the look of a true biker setting off on a long and perilous journey, and he sent off slowly. It was night, the air was cold, made bearable only by the bandana, which he raised to cover his mouth and nose, but the cold pierced through into his nose, directly into his lungs. His eyes and forehead were frozen numb in minutes, and he thought that his helmet would have been useful then, but he had had to leave it behind, on the ground, when he fled from Diana's bodyguard.